Well, welcome back to True Rhymes. We thought tonight we might have a bit of a look at Henry VIII. Now, there's a bloke who spawned some rhymes. I tell you what, if there was ever a hero in rhyme writing, not that he wrote any of the rhymes, but there was shitloads written about him, and he was a powerful individual indeed in history. Just a little bit messed up, I think. He had a few moments. I'm going to read you a little rhyme about his wives. This is one thing I think it's kind of cool, because the dude had 6 of them, 6 wives. Not a bad effort for a lad. I tell you what, little bit of sympathy for him though, because he was trying to have a son, because he needed a son to be an heir in the system. He had a couple of girls, and anyway, there was a rhyme that went along like this. So just check this out. I have to put my eyes on so I can see what I'm doing. And it went something like this. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. I mean, that's kind of catchy, isn't it? He had Catherine, Anne, Jane, and another Anne. She was from Cleves, though. She was a different Anne. And then she had Catherine. He had 2 Catherines and 2 Annes. He's not bad. He saved him remembering names, wasn't it? I thought it was all very interesting because apparently there was a whole lot of messed up shit that went on. And there were some very bad ways you could die if you upset Henry VIII. I mean, he cut a couple of his wives' heads off for a start. I mean, tell you what, if you're brutal enough to kill your own woman, I don't think you've got any chance in the court. And there was a poor old bloke called Bloomin' Wolsey. He was I think he was a cardinal dude. Like, he was from the Catholic Church, so he was a cardinal. And apparently, Old Mother Hubbard was talking about him and Henry and trying to get Henry a divorce. And if you know anything about English history, the Anglican Church got born out of all this madness. I'm going to read you Old Mother Hubbard because I can't remember it because it's too long. Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to fetch the poor dog a bone. But when she got there, the cupboard was bare. And so the poor dog had none. She went to the fishmonger to buy him some fish. But when she came back, he was licking the dish. I'm assuming that was the dog, not the king. She sent to the grocer to buy him some stone fruit, but when she came back, he was playing the flute. She went to the cobbler to buy him some shoes, but when she came back, he was reading the news. Now, apparently, poor old Wolsey, he was quite in favour with the king, and he was a commoner. A commoner who had been risen up through the ranks. And he had made himself quite wealthy by actually looking after the king. And the king had given him all these favours, all this land and these really cool castles and all really cool shit. But of course, you know how it goes when you upset a very powerful individual. It's interesting if you go through history how crazy one man's passions and thought patterns can be if he's completely in power, which is what Henry VIII had at the time. He was completely in charge. And he said to poor old Wolsey, go and see the Pope. Tell the Pope, I've had enough of this first wife. I want to marry Anne Boleyn. Hang on, I can't even pronounce it. Anyway, I want to marry Anne because she's pretty hot. And go and tell the Pope that I want to get a new chick. Now, that would have been a bit of a trip, by the way. He wasn't just nipped round the corner. There wasn't any emails. There wasn't any, Skyping or what's that other bloody thing we do now? Zooming? Is it Zooming? Is it whatever that fucking thing's doing with the bloody corona mess we're in? Anyway, all of that shit. He had to get in a sailboat, sail off to bloomin' Rome and talk to the Pope. And you know what the Pope went? The Pope went, up yours, Henry. You're not having a divorce. And that's all there is to it. So poor old bloody Cardinal Wolsey had to come home with his tail between his legs, which is probably why he's referred to as the dog in this whole story. I'm not sure. Was he the dog or was he Mother Hubbard? I got a sneaking suspicion that he was Mother Hubbard and King Henry VIII was the dog in the whole deal, and I'm sure that's probably why the guy writing the nursery rhyme didn't want anybody to think that way, because Henry would have chopped his head off and all. Now, if you were the ruler of the bloody world at the time, you know what you'd do? You'd say, well, you know what? Stuff it. I'm going to make a whole new religion, and I'm going to make myself in charge of it so that I can divorce my wife. I mean, that's pretty hectic. That is a pretty hectic thing to do. You just change the whole system just to suit your own lust. I mean, boy, I tell you what, can you imagine the divorce lawyers in that bloody country? They'd be going, this is bonkers. You just can't do that shit. They were. Anyway, so the whole bloody system got turned on its head. But there was an upside to this for the king, though, because there was all these Catholic monasteries and kingdoms and... what were they called? Not kingdoms, they were monasteries and all this other cool shit the Catholic Church had at the time. So the king acquired all of that stuff. And what do you do when you acquire shit? Of course you turn it into gold, don't you? So you sold it all off. I'm fairly sure, in reference to this whole story, is that poor old Cardinal Wolsey was actually Mother Hubbard going to get the bloody bone for the king, and that was not going to get sorted out. And so then he tried a few other things, is why you get the shoe mentioned and the fruit mentioned and all this other crazy ass shit. It was just because it was an impossibility. The poor lad came back home, and you know what happens when you displease people in power? They take your head from your shoulders and your arms from your armpits. I think that's called drawn and quartered, but I think they just cut his head off because he was a half reasonable bloke. So, he just took it a bit light on him and just chopped his head off, which is kind of weird thinking in this day and age. It's a mercy to just get killed. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to think about being put in a dungeon in the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages or whatever the age we were in. I think it was the 1700s. Does that make it the Middle Ages? I guess they were just crawling out of the Dark Ages because, they'd got organised and they had thumb screws and shit, so they were just a little bit less than messed up. Anyway, as I was saying at the start of this episode, Henry VIII spawned a whole lot of cool rhymes, and his daughter didn't do any shame to the rhyme selling either. Well, actually, both his daughters, because the poor old Henry, he had 6 wives, and the one wife that gave him a son decided to die having the kid. Eventually, Henry passes on because that's what happens when you get old and, you don't look after yourself. I think he was a little bit of a glutton, they said. But anyway, he passed away, and his poor young Edward, I think Edward was 10-ish, 9-ish, 10-ish, when he took the throne. So that was a bit messy. But just as the bloke was hitting his straps at 15 or 16, I think it was, he got crook and he died, and then one of the daughters took over. So Old Mother Hubbard, of course, is very interesting little parody because we've got poor old Cardinal Wolsey and his mates are running the country pretty much. King Henry VIII, he wasn't much for paperwork. He didn't like paperwork. He didn't like bloody organising shit. He was just off doing his concubines and fixing up his wives. So, of course, you can get quite powerful if you're good at paperwork. You're writing shit and doing stuff and filling out some forms, and all the land and all the castles happen to end up in your name. I don't know how that happened, but, just get the memo. But, of course, every good plan has a downfall. And when your king's a bit randy and he just wants to nick the old woman off and get the you one into bed, if you stay tuned, you're going to find out how much messed up shit can happen to a country just because one man was lusting after a bit of kitty cat. I mean, I tell you what, he gave it a cracking go though. He had 6 of them, so, I guess he had fun. If you'd like to see this show survive, don't forget to click, like, subscribe, share it with your friends. Hell, everybody should have a laugh because this world's getting out of control. So, you know what? And if you feel so inclined, go down a little bit further and click on the Patreon support button, and you never know what the hell we might research. If you happen to feel so inclined to get really generous on the Patreon and you give us enough money, you could send us a request to research a nursery rhyme that you're interested in.